everyone. My name is Steve Martino. I became involved in the CTN in roughly 2000 and was involved with all of the motivational interviewing trials that occurred and several other protocols over time.
And welcome, I'm Theresa Moyers, and I'm affiliated with the Southwest node for the CTN and have been involved in 3 clinical trials using motivational interviewing, mostly involved with treatment integrity and making sure that the therapists are trained to fidelity.
And Terry and I would like to welcome you to this webinar. We hope that it's going to serve as a useful introduction or refresher about motivational interviewing, and hopefully also a good way to spend your morning or lunch for those who are on the East Coast. We obviously would prefer a more interactive format, but we are unable to do that. In order to have some interaction at the end, we'll reserve about 10 minutes for questions. And I hope you all know that in spirit we would like to engage with you more fully about this topic and appreciate the time that you've taken to meet with us today. So the learning objectives for the webinar include several. First, we want to go over or help you understand what motivational interviewing is. We'd like to review how motivational interviewing works. We will identify key elements used in MI. Further, we would like to talk about the efficacy and effectiveness of motivational interviewing. And finally, identify strategies for learning motivational interviewing. These objectives are going to serve as the roadmap for all the topics that we will be covering today. So let's begin with what is motivational interviewing. Just to provide a brief history of this approach, the early formulation of the approach began in the early 1980s when Bill Miller, one of the founders of the approach, had a sabbatical in Norway, and out of his discussions there, he conceived of a model with clinical guidelines, which ultimately became what is known as motivational interviewing. The initial ideas were published in a landmark paper in behavioral psychotherapy in 1983, which is pictured on the slide. And the focus at that time was on problem drinking, where this approach had its origins. Later, in 1989, on another sabbatical, this time in Australia, Bill Miller met Stephen Rolnick, who had been doing similar work, and in particular in healthcare settings. And in 1991, they co-authored their original MI textbook, which is pictured in the center of the slide. Now, Stephen Rolnick, as I said, was particularly interested in using motivational interviewing and adapting it for healthcare settings, and this began to really heed the way for applications of MI beyond addictive behaviors. And what I've included on the slide are several of the books that show its expansion into other populations beyond addiction, addictive behaviors, beyond adults, looking at adolescents and young adults, and beyond the individual format where it originated, with it being increasingly used in groups. Research and development in motivational interviewing has been quite vast, and MI has become one of the most studied psychosocial treatment approaches in addiction in the mental health fields. And so the textbooks kept up with all of this with a new edition in 2002 and then a third edition in 2013. And of course, with all of this activity, there has been a substantial interest among people to learn motivational interviewing, and this has resulted in numerous training efforts, organizations to support training, and a variety of books that are serving the purposes of helping people learn motivational interviewing, and most recently applying it to themselves with a self-help application again, all pictured on this slide.
So let's begin with what is a definition of motivational interviewing. I've got one on the screen here for you, and we'll go over that in a minute. But let me begin by saying that MI is a therapeutic intervention that focuses not only on the content that happens during the treatment session, but also importantly on the process. That is, motivational interviewing privileges a relational component or an experiential interaction between the client and the therapist. What this means is that it doesn't only matter what you do with clients, but it matters explicitly how you do those things. And Steve's going to be talking about that a little bit later when we discuss the spirit of motivational interviewing. For now, what's important to know is that MI is collaborative. That means that it relies on an equal partnership and power sharing rather than an expert and recipient role. And it's goal-oriented. That means that there is a target behavior or a target change that is on the table between the two. Motivational interviewing relies on motivation that is already present within the client and the therapist's skills for enhancing or growing that motivation as the interaction occurs. Motivational interviewing isn't about implanting motivation into a person, but rather using the therapist's skills to enhance the motivation that the client already has within them. An important caveat to motivational interviewing is that it must be used with compassion. And that word compassion can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But what it means in the context of motivational interviewing is that the intervention is done in the client's best interest. That is, we don't use motivational interviewing to try to convince clients to do things that are not in their best interest. So motivational interviewing is not a method that should be used unless you believe that what you are doing or what you are trying to persuade the client to do is in the client's best interest. And that may seem obvious to us as therapists that the things that we want for our clients are in their best interest, but there are times when we want to interact with people in ways and we're not really sure it's in their best interest. And a good example of that is enrolling people in a clinical trial. So because we should not really have an opinion about whether or not a person participates in a research study or they don't, motivational interviewing would not be appropriate for trying to enroll people in clinical trials. So there's a good example of how that question might come up in our own work in the CTN. Let's go one slide further and talk about the 4 processes in motivational interviewing. So when we think about what MI is actually like, we're going to think about 4 different processes. And the first process is the engaging process. That is where the therapist attempts to engage the client into the collaborative interaction. Engaging is not specific to motivational interviewing, and it does not require MI-specific skills. It requires good basic counseling skills, like reflective listening and asking evocative questions. So engaging is an important foundation for MI, but it is not motivational interviewing. Hopefully, it's part of all the therapeutic interventions that you use. Focusing, similarly, is not specific to motivational interviewing. It is the process of negotiating collaboratively a target behavior to be on the table. Again, an important foundation for MI because we require a target change in order to move forward, but not motivational interviewing in and of itself. So the first 2 processes, engaging and focusing, are thought to be not specific to MI, but more a foundation for it. Now we move to the process of evoking. And this is where the therapist tries to differentially attend to and evoke the client's own reasons for wanting to change, usually by paying attention to the language the client uses. And in the evoking stage, the therapist will also be trying to soften sustained talk or the language that the client uses against change or in favor of the status quo. Evoking is the unique element that makes motivational interviewing itself. Planning is the process which can occur after evoking and may or may not be part of a motivational interviewing session.
Okay, So now what I'd like to ask you all to do is to take a moment and close your eyes. And I want you to imagine a couple of scenarios. First, I'd like you to bring to mind a secret that you have, something that you haven't shared with anyone. And bring to mind the reasons that you may not have shared that secret. And now imagine if I were to ask you right now to tell us on this webinar what your secret is. Right now, right on this call, identifying who you are, imagine me saying you need to tell us your secret. What would you be thinking? What would you be feeling? And now imagine if you chose to share your secret at a time of your own choosing and with someone that you decided you wanted to share your secret with. What would that person need to be like? How would that person need to act for you to feel sufficiently comfortable in which to talk about your secret? Now, of course, Terry and I are not going to ask you to share your secrets with us, but I want you to consider the reactions that you had to those two questions. The first question being, what were you thinking and feeling? Perhaps you felt anxious or guilty. Sometimes people feel shame or anger, embarrassment, fear. Perhaps you thought something like, you can't make me share the secret, or maybe you might even have considered changing your secret. The point is that you likely felt unsettled or uncomfortable or upset in some manner. Now, when you consider the type of person you might decide to share your secret with, you may have come up with several key factors, such as the capacity to understand your situation, someone who helped you clarify your thoughts and feelings, maybe someone who you felt clearly had your best interest in mind, someone who gave you confidence, would protect the confidentiality of what you were expressing. And so consider what it is that you felt that you needed in order to share something that might be difficult. And ask yourself, or think about the people that we're meeting with and the work that we do, and how we're asking them to, in essence, share their secrets with us. Most likely they want exactly what we want in order to have a conversation about some type of difficult change matter. And so in MI, what we are really trying to do is create or express an underlying spirit of motivational interviewing that really demonstrates the very things that we would hope to have when working with other people on our own change matters. So we would want to demonstrate that we're working with a person rather than for the person. This is really represented in the partnership aspect of spirit. We want to try to see a person as he or she is, that we want to remain curious about the person's perspective and honor their right and their capacity for self-direction. We want to acknowledge their strengths and their absolute worth, which is all part of acceptance. It also means that we give priority to the person's needs and welfare. This is a key component of compassion. And moreover, we really believe within all people are the seeds or resources to change, and that we're poised to help people really draw out these qualities, these beliefs and values, their skills that might be used to enhance their motivation for change. These are all the underlying characteristics of the spirit of MI.
Let's talk for a minute about the nuts and bolts of how motivational interviewing works. First, to remind you, Motivational interviewing has both a technical and a relational component. What this means is that we pay attention to the relationship and the engagement between the therapist and the client, and that can be measured in very specific ways. We kind of capture the spirit of motivational interviewing that Steve just talked about. But that's not enough. That's necessary but not sufficient for change to occur in an MI model. We also want therapists to be doing specific things, and that's called the technical component of motivational interviewing. Now, let's look for a moment at the relational component in a little more detail. The relational component is a client-centered foundation. MI is really based on many of the ideas from Carl Rogers and his faith and investment in a client's own inherent ability to right their own behavior, to change themselves. From this perspective, the clinician's job is to enhance the client's motivation and not create it from scratch. So motivational interviewing is not about making people do things they don't want to do. It's about helping people to become motivated to do the things that they want to do anyway. Therapists are useful in motivational interviewing when they create an experience for clients in their interactions with them that allows that motivation to flourish. And this is most likely when therapists are empathic, when they support the client's autonomy and choice, when they work in partnership and equality with their clients, and they are compassionate and accepting of them. So, for example, if the client says, "No offense, but why do I have to talk to you about this? You seem like a nice person, but I don't think you have an idea of how hard it might be is for me to give up drinking right now." So I want you to take a moment and think in your mind how you might respond to that if you were trying to keep the spirit of motivational interviewing. Also, I'd like you to think how you might respond to it if you weren't particularly paying attention to a spirit of partnership and collaboration and acceptance. So just take a moment. So if the therapist were to say, "You're wondering if I can understand what things are really like for you," that's an example of a high empathy response because the therapist is taking care to convey to the client an understanding of their worldview or their perspective. So we would call that high in empathy, for example. If the therapist said something like this, "Well, it might be hard for you to quit, but look at all you'd gain. You have only one DWI. Sometimes people don't stop until they have 4 or 5. In some ways, you're very lucky." Now, this is not a toxic response, but this is an MI inappropriate response because it's using persuasion rather than empathy to respond to the client's ambivalence about changing. Let's go on for a moment and talk about the technical component of motivational interviewing because I really want to give you an introduction to this before we move on. And this is the part of motivational interviewing that sometimes people miss and they misunderstand because they grasp that MI is about being client-centered and having empathy, but they don't necessarily have a good feeling for the technical component. The technical component is about the language focus in MI. And the idea here is that human beings, including our clients and including us, by the way, often create our intentions and our motivation in our social interactions with others. So it's not that our motivation exists like a static trait within us. It's not like we have a motivation level and the therapist's job is to just come in and measure that and assign us a number. No, motivation is something that is created in interactions with other people. You can be motivated on your own, but you can also find and enhance motivation in your interactions with other people. Language and the language that we use when we're communicating with other people can create that intention and that motivation when it occurs spontaneously and in an empathic interaction with another person. And that language we call change talk. It's language like this. I want to change. I need to change. I have good reasons for changing. That's what we call change talk. And the opposite coin is sustained talk, where we would say, I don't need to change, I don't want to change, I don't have any good reasons for changing, I like the status quo as it is. Change talk is public, it is spontaneous, and it is interpersonal. And that's what matters about it. Change talk is not that you chant to yourself, I'm going to change, I'm going to change. Change talk isn't that you come in the room and you tell the therapist what they want to hear because you've carefully rehearsed what you know they want you to say. And change talk isn't being hypnotized. It's not a Jedi mind trick that the therapist uses to get some particular thing from the client's mouth. In MI, we help people talk themselves into change. We help them give voice to their own arguments for change. And when MI is working well, it's the client that is offering the reasons for change and not the therapist. And the model for how motivational interviewing works looks a little bit like this. The therapist does particular things in the experience that they're having with the client, and those things involve characteristics like emphasizing autonomy, emphasizing choice, affirming the client, evoking reasons for change, asking about values, asking about how the client would like their world to be, things like that. Those behaviors on the part of the therapist actually increase the amount of change talk that the client gives, and they soften or reduce the amount of sustained talk that's present. It is that change in language which produces the change in motivation and improves outcomes. In addition, we suspect that therapist behaviors have a direct influence of their own on outcomes. Things like therapist empathy can contribute directly to outcome. So both the relational and the technical component depend on therapist behaviors. And that's why we pay so much attention to what therapists do in motivational interviewing. And here's an example of how the therapist might respond appropriately to change talk. So the client might say something like this. Go ahead and take a moment to read this slide. Now, what you may notice in this slide is that this is the way lots of clients talk. They offer both change and sustained talk in the same sentence. And that's very common, very normal. I call it the Oreo cookie of client language, which is that it's a creamy middle of change talk surrounded by two crispy wafers of sustained talk. That's how change talk often comes to us. And if we know about the technical component of motivational interviewing, we are going to give a different response than if we don't. So the therapist might say, well, you're the only one who can decide what you might change about your drinking. No one can decide that for you. And as you think about it, you're finding some concerns. Now, this is an MI brilliant response to what this client is saying. This client is offering ambivalence, and the therapist is choosing to focus on the client's motivations for changing. So we would code, or we would look at what this client is saying as both change talk and sustained talk, and we would look at what the therapist is saying as emphasizing autonomy and reflecting change talk where the therapist finds it. So this differential attention to evoking and cultivating change talk and softening or reducing sustained talk is the heart of the technical component of MI.
Okay, and so we'd like to next cover what the therapeutic elements are that are used in motivational interviewing. And for those of you who have familiarity with this approach, you may recognize many of these different elements. So in motivational interviewing, there are, of course, a variety of elements that are going to serve both the relational and technical aspect of this approach. And it's key to really appreciate that these are not specific to just building relationship or just trying to draw out change talk or soften sustained talk, that they are used at your discretion based on the responses and the interaction that you're having with the client. perhaps the ORs, the open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries, have served as the bedrock of really engaging folks in sessions, building relationship, and understanding their perspectives. But again, these elements can really bring attention to change talk, serve as at times as a highlighter to encourage more elaboration about people's motives for change. And they can be quite useful for responding to and helping people resolve their hesitations about change. But sometimes people don't spontaneously discuss their motives for change in some critical areas, depending on the discussion you're having, and they could benefit by a more focused approach to drawing out issues. And so there are a variety of different approaches for being a little bit more directive in trying to draw out people's motives for change or for managing what may cause them to hesitate in making changes. These include the use of evocative questions and reflections. Most people are somewhat familiar with the importance and confidence rulers. There are strategies for exploring goals and values and looking at the degree to which what matters most to individuals may be discrepant with what they're currently doing, and how changing their current behavior could bring their values and their goals in line with how they best see themselves. Personal strengths and exploring past successes. These are all very common approaches for trying to look at what lies within an individual that may help them enhance their motivation for change. And we also want to be clear that giving advice and feedback are not prohibited in motivational interviewing. It is really the spirit in which they are delivered and the degree to which they convey respect for what the person makes of the information and advice that matters. So the spirit of MI really pervades the delivery of all of these techniques, and it is up to you in interaction with the client to decide how you want to proceed within the interview. And so I've provided for you some examples that we can go through to help you appreciate your sort of careful consideration of how to respond to what people may say in sessions. And so in the first example, this particular client says, "I know I should come to see you more often. It's just that most of the time I can't get a ride." Now, depending on what you focus on or say will affect whether you increase or decrease the probability of change talk or sustained talk. So you might decide to use some questions. For example, say something like, "How come you feel you need to see me more often?" That is going to be more likely to draw out the reasons for engaging in treatment and services. On the other hand, if you were to say something like, "Why can't you get a ride?" you're most likely to hear about all the obstacles and impediments for coming to the sessions. Similarly, you could use reflections to emphasize one side or the other. You might say something like, "Meeting with me is important to you." And this may then prompt the client to discuss more what the reasons are for coming to treatment and why that matters to him or her. However, if you were to reflect you're having trouble figuring out how to get a ride, then you might hear more about that. And so what you say matters because it truly does affect the likelihood of the type of response that you're going to get from the client. In the next example, this would be an example of what Terry referred to as an Oreo cookie. I don't need to stop drinking. I need to cut down on my drinking for sure, but I don't need to stop. And so here you certainly could focus on the elements of this statement that is more change-oriented or not, but you also have the opportunity to emphasize the choice being made by this individual, in that there may be a hint of this person being told that he or she needs to quit. So you could say something like, you've really thought about this and know that the best thing for you right now is to cut down your drinking. Or you might simply snatch the change talk from this sort of jaws of resistance here and reflect the need to cut down on drinking without paying attention to the other elements. In the third example, I don't want to go off on her. She just keeps going on about the past and shoving it in my face as if she wants me to hit her again. So here, you could affirm a person's effort to avoid partner violence and recognize their efforts to understand what their triggers are. You might say something like, you really don't want to hit her, and you're trying to understand situations that could cause you trouble. Or you also might say something like, or decide to use a confidence ruler, since these issues seem important to the person, yet he, in this case, may be expressing concern about his ability to control his anger and aggression under certain circumstances. In the fourth example, the client says, that program might be good at helping some people, but not me. I can change by myself. Now, this might prompt some of us to feel the desire to give unsolicited advice, such as an addict alone is a person in bad company, or it might lead us to extol the benefits of mutual support and attending 12-step meetings. An alternative and an am-I-consistent way to approach this would be to explore the person's strong statement of ability. Or, depending on where you're in the interview, you may decide to use this as a prompt to begin to develop a change plan. So the point is that there's really no one right way to do motivational interviewing. It's not a cookbook of strategies. It's really a conversational dance that moves towards change, and how you decide to specifically move within the session will differ somewhat with each person. And clearly, the principles of the practice of motivational interviewing will guide your each and every move within the session. So does motivational interviewing work? We've talked about what it is, how it works, the types of strategies or elements that exist within the approach. Does it work? And motivational interviewing is one of the most researched psychotherapeutic approaches in the mental health and addiction fields. It has, across multiple meta-analyses, consistently shown small to moderate clinically significant effects. And these effects have generalized across a range of targeted behaviors, not just addictive behaviors, but also across a variety of other targeted areas for change, including dietary changes, exercise, following treatment recommendations, following surgical procedures. It's been popular within a whole host of areas, and so that's one of the nice findings across numerous studies that have been done over the past several decades. When you take motivational interviewing on the road and look at its effectiveness within more real-world settings where counselors are using them within programs, perhaps supervisors of those programs are supporting the implementation of it, and the continued training of individuals, the effects from those trials tend to reduce. And so while there are some promising results from some of the CTN trials and all, it's important to keep in mind that one of the main challenges in bringing motivational interviewing or scaling it up within the broader community is how to continue to support its integrity such that people are using it well with the groups of individuals that they have targeted for its use. So when motivational interviewing is performed well, it works well, and we have lots of studies that in essence support what Terry shared with you about how MI works.
So you might be asking yourself, well, how does a person learn to do motivational interviewing? Because it's a little bit different than some of the other therapeutic approaches where you really need to learn the content. You sort of have to memorize the treatment manual. And in this approach, well, there really is no treatment manual. It's that you learn a process, a technical component, and you learn a set of skills about the experience that the client has. How do we train therapists to do that? And can we train therapists to do that? And the answer is we can. We can train lots of different kinds of therapists, clinicians to do motivational interviewing, but not all of them. So the news is that most people do better at motivational interviewing, and they can improve and become very good at it. Some people are good at it almost right off the bat. Almost they're self-starters because they have such a good feeling for it. And then there are some people who really don't learn motivational interviewing even when they have a lot of training. In general, motivational interviewing works best when you have some sort of introduction to motivational interviewing, either with a supervisor who knows a lot about it and directs your learning, or by going to a workshop or a seminar. That initial learning must be followed by enrichments to your training or your initial learning, and those occur through direct observation. Motivational interviewing can't be learned well unless you have somebody who is better at it than you are looking at what you're doing and giving you feedback and coaching on what you're doing. And there are a series of very, very good studies showing that about 3 to 4 feedback or coaching sessions using at least 5 hours of the learner's contact time over a 6-month period can sustain skills among learners of motivational interviewing. Without this kind of direct observation, feedback, and coaching, a person's MI skills will be back at baseline at that same 6-month period. We use a series of different ratings for people to let them know how well they're doing in motivational interviewing. This is a tool I'm going to talk to you about. One of them, and one of them I've used extensively, and another one Steve has used extensively, and both of them provide feedback to the learner through direct observation. The first is the MIGHTY, the Motivational Interviewing Treatment Integrity Coding System, where we rate all kinds of things that therapists are doing with clients, including things like cultivating change talk, softening sustained talk, emphasizing autonomy, seeking collaboration, confronting, persuading, all of those kinds of behaviors, in addition to just simply reflections and questions. And Steve's tool that he's used more extensively is the Motivational Interviewing Assessment, the MIA step. And Steve, I wonder if you'd like to say a word or two about that.
Sure. This was a tool that actually came from the CTN trials that were conducted looking at the effectiveness of motivational interviewing, and it was designed to help support program-based supervisors to provide the direct observation, feedback, and coaching for their staff. The scale consists of 10 MI consistent items, half of which are geared more towards the relational aspect, if you will, and half of which may tap a bit more of the technical aspect of MI. It also includes a couple of items that try to capture instances of MI inconsistent actions on the part of the therapist, and all of this is then provided, feedback is provided to the clinicians, and they get feedback about how often they are using these different approaches, as well as with what skill or competence they deliver them. Terry, would you like me to go on about the other
Sure, if you like,
innovations?
go ahead.
Sure. So there are some other recent innovations under development. Because listening to sessions and carefully coding them and providing feedback can be quite resource intensive, there have been a variety of other people trying to work on alternative strategies for giving people feedback that might be more feasible to use. And so one approach is to develop client rating tools that would be completed by clients at the end of their sessions to try to tap, using simple language, the kinds of MI consistent and inconsistent actions on the part of their therapists. And so one of them is called the Client Evaluation of Motivational Interviewing, the SEMI, and this is still under development. There are also very interesting and brave efforts going on to develop computer-based natural language processing models to replicate the human coding, and this has been done focused more on the MIghty scale and related scales. And here what would happen is an audio file of a session would literally be decoded by a computer program, and then providing integrity rating-based feedback that could thus be used for feedback and coaching purposes. In addition, there are several online resources available for learning motivational interviewing. Medscape Education has a variety of webinars and teaching tools that can be used. The Submersion Training Center also provides a variety of simulated training experiences where individuals interact with an avatar that then gives people immediate feedback about the extent to which they're consistent or inconsistent with MI. They have these applied to a couple of different scenarios, adults, young adults, and medical settings. And most recently, the Addiction Technology Transfer Center has come up with an online course called the Tour of MI, which they generally use an instructor and pull together a classroom, a virtual classroom of participants in order to help people learn some of the basics of MI. In general, the online learning tools require more evaluation to see to what extent they are improving people's skills. And at this point, most of them are marketed as an aid or an addendum to the other types of training that Terry just discussed.
Great. So I just want to say a word or two about credentialing. There are no empirically based benchmarks of MI performance directly linked to client outcomes. There are actually, but they're not consistent. We're making some progress in this area. So I'd say probably in the next couple of years, we're going to be able to say these are the things that therapists do that make a direct impact on client outcomes. Right now, it's all focused on change talk. I think some of that will change soon. We are beginning there is no such thing as credentialing and motivational interviewing right now. Sometimes people think that belonging to the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, or MINT, means that you're credentialed to do MI, and it certainly doesn't. What it means is that you belong to the MINT. The Practitioner Certification Committee within the MINT is now working on a series of recommendations which I think will be adopted in order to allow us to certify people to do motivational interviewing. And that will certainly involve not only a review of the person's training and use of MI, but a work sample that the person will submit that will be evaluated. The Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, which I mentioned previously, is the best organization if you want to know more about MI, if you would like to get more training in motivational interviewing, or if you are interested in deepening your use of and professional interaction with motivational interviewing. It was established in 1993. We now have over 800 individuals that have participated and been trained in the MINT. It's an international organization. That's one of the characteristics of MINT, and we are represented in 20 countries. Every year there's a training of trainers, or a TNT training, and that goes along with annual forums for people belonging in motivational interviewing. And if you're interested in any of that, you can find that on the MINT network. Webpage.
And so for your convenience, we listed some of the books and references that could also further enhance your knowledge of MI. A lot of the books that are listed represent some of the book covers that I had put in the earlier slide, and then these references really capture some of the major meta-analyses that speak to several of the points that Terry and I have covered today. And so now we have time for questions and comments.
There is one comment in the queue where Asia Ashraf is a Humphrey Fellow from Pakistan and currently at VCU, and is interested in obtaining more training and more information about MI, which is her major. So if you had any more references for that, that would be great.
So the only recommendation I have is to look on the MI website, where there are a list of trainings being offered by MINT trainers, and to there's also, I think, MI trainings occasionally being offered through the CTN. So I think that might be a possibility as well if you're affiliated with the CTN.
And the other thing you might do is when you identify the list of trainers within that website, you can feel free to contact someone directly. People in the MINT are very generous and are usually pretty good about getting back to individuals. So if you have someone locally, convenient for you, then please, by all means, reach out to the trainers.
Great.
From Eve Gelstrom.
Okay, great. Yep.
Eve asks, could you provide some examples of evocative questions or reflections? And how about if I do one, and then we'll let Steve take a swing at it.
Okay.
So, Steve, if I said to you, I'm worried about my drinking, but on the other hand, I think everybody's just paying too much attention to it, and it's starting to bug me. Okay,
so an example of an evocative question would be, tell me about what worries you about your drinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to be an alcoholic like my dad. My dad was a really bad drinker, and I don't want to end up like him.
You have hope that things will be different for you, and not drinking is one way to get there.
Yes. So that was great, Steve. He just gave a very good example of an evocative question and a reflection, and now I'll try to do the same. Steve, you want to pitch to me?
Sure. I just don't know. The cocaine is a problem, but I'm not sure I'm ready to change the marijuana.
Mm-hmm. What are the things that make you think that cocaine might have to change in your life now?
Well, it's caused me a great deal of trouble with my girlfriend, and I've just spent so much money that we're probably not going to be able to pay the rent this month. That's been the latest issue.
Mm-hmm. You can see that if you don't make a change in your cocaine use, things could really get a lot worse for you soon.
Yeah. And so likewise, Terry just demonstrated, bringing emphasis to the things that were change-oriented in what I said, and then drew those things out further.
Thank you both. I did have a question myself. Are there considerations for how to conduct MI sessions with younger individuals versus like teenagers versus adults, or would it just be applied the same way?
Well, I'll take a swing at that.
Yeah.
There are some randomized controlled studies showing that motivational interviewing is useful in reducing some kinds of substance use and risky sexual behavior on the part of teenagers. In general, I think what the research is showing is that there needs to be more of an emphasis on sustained talk when you're dealing with adolescents and perhaps with more coerced populations in general. Whereas people who are self-referred, you might be better attending to change talk, whereas in adolescents, it looks like the sustained talk is what we really need to pay attention to in order to see differences in outcomes. But that's very, very tentative finding on my part.
And I would say the other dimension that may come up perhaps slightly more frequently is the issue of feeling coerced and dealing with the power differential that adolescents may find themselves in or feel that they're in, and being able to manage that and looking at what kinds of choices do they have within their situations and managing that aspect. But I think one of the keys that's important about MI is its broad applicability, and that the principles themselves should continue to guide its application no matter what population it's being applied to.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from our participants? Or even any comments that you've experienced in applying MI in your practice? Okay, great. Well, I think this is an indication that the review here has been quite thorough. So thank you, Terry and Steve.
You're more than welcome.
You're
welcome.
welcome.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Very informative. So if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to email me at ctntraining@ms.com, and I can get that information over to Terry and Steve and get their feedback. In about 10 days, I'm going to post the recording of this session on the CTN, or send it to the librarians to post on the CTN Dissemination Libraries website, where we have a catalog of all of our previous training, so you'll be able to see it again and review the information at your convenience. And I invite everyone back, and you can also share this with any of your colleagues. Next month, October 14th, we'll be addressing concepts of CBT and strengths-based approaches to addiction and mental health research and treatment, and that'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. Again, Terry and Steve, perhaps we can extend this conversation to some other aspects of MI on another scale, and discuss some of the studies where it's been used and some of the findings out of that at a later date. But till then, thank you for your participation.
You're welcome.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye-bye.
Bye, Steve.
Bye, Terry.